Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's seminar on the higher education short courses trial. Thanks for taking the time out of your summer to join us for this. It's great to see so many people joining, not least given the short notice for the event, which we'll talk about in due course. I'm often asked in my role as Director of Fair Access, what are the reasons for such unequal access to higher education in England? And of course, one factor is grades in schools, another is expectations in families and communities. But the third issue I've consistently highlighted is the paucity of opportunities to study later in life and the narrow funnel into higher education for so many people. So it's really crucial, I think, that we improve the availability and the support for studies that can fit around work and also caring responsibilities. And that's important not just for improving fair access, but also to enable upskilling and retraining, which is crucial for employers so they can benefit and benefit from the skills they need both now and into the future. So this is a great opportunity to address that, to trial it as the government considers implementing its wider lifelong learning plans. In the first part of today's event, we'll hear from Myant from the DFE, from Sandra Binns from the OfS, and Hugh from the Student Loans Company. We'll then have a Q&A chaired by my colleague Brooke Church. You can submit questions for the Q&A in Zoom through the Q&A function in Zoom, and ideally if you could share your name and your institution for those questions. The last thing I wanted to say before we get into the core of this is there is a live caption option, in other words, subtitles, which is available by clicking the CC icon in Zoom. And in answer to the question that's already been raised, we will be recording this event and sharing it on its website, so you can go back to what we say and share it with others. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. I'm now going to hand over to Myant from the DFE, who will give us an overview of the scheme. Over to you, Pete.
Excellent, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here today. So I head the policy development for the HE short courses trial. So just going to give a bit of an overview of the sort of context towards it, and then what we're wanting to do. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm sure as all of you are already aware, the Prime Minister announced plans to introduce a lifelong loan entitlement last year. This will help to give people the opportunity to train, retrain and upskill throughout their lives to respond to changing skills needs. We're aiming to have a truly sort of transformative impact in post-18 study through this and help to deliver parity between further and higher education. This is really for all sort of level 4 to 6 provision in terms of for the providers. So we're seeing it as being a key way of incentivizing more collaboration between providers. We plan to introduce the LLE from 2025. It will provide individuals with a loan entitlement to the equivalent of 4 years of post-18 education. I think this sort of key difference with the current system is that this will open up tuition fees for both modules and full years of study at higher technical and degree levels, regardless of whether they're provided in colleges or universities. And we want to make it easier for students to navigate the options available, create a more streamlined funding system, and encourage provision to better meet the needs of people, employers, and the economy. I think throughout the LLE aims, what we want to do is allow learners to study more flexibly, allowing them to space out the studies, transfer credits between FE and HE institutions and between HE institutions, and take up more part-time study. We see this as really critical in terms of helping people to build up learning over time and have a real choice in how and when they study to acquire new skills. is part of the, as this is a sort of transformative program, we're doing a number of things over the next few years as we move towards the lifelong loan entitlement. We're looking to stimulate the provision of high quality higher technical education, with the first HTQs coming on in September 22, and there's a number of pilots that we're looking to that we're introducing to incentivize more flexible and modular provision. We're already legislating in this Parliament, as people may have seen, in terms of in the Queen's speech, and then through the Skills and Post-16 Education Bill, which was proceeding through committee stage last week. If we move on to the next slide. I mean, this is something that ministers care a lot about, and as the university's minister said, regardless of their age or personal circumstances, many learners need to access courses in a more flexible way. We want to empower individuals to take control of their learning by giving them real choice in how and when they choose to study. That study around work, family and personal commitments, to retrain and upskill as their needs and the needs of the economy changes. She's excited, as am I, to be trialling higher education short courses across levels 4 to 6. It's an important step as we build towards a lifelong loan entitlement. Around 20 providers will have the opportunity to participate in a unique trial, bringing together employers, providers and learners to test a truly ambitious and world-leading system. Next slide. As I was already highlighted, this is part of our sort of overall pathway towards LLE. Through the trial, we want to both be providing learners with exciting new opportunities to study in a more flexible way. But we're also looking at this as part of our approach to moving towards the LLE and making changes now as we sort of test and build towards it. We're keen to test and stimulate demand for modular learning and also stimulate the provision from providers. We need to better understand how employers, HE providers and prospective learners will behave towards this greater funding flexibility and how we should adapt to user needs. And then finally, understand how the Student Loans Company can build systems and processes to best support future learners. I mean, we really see this as a sort of exciting, unique opportunity for providers and learners and employers to be involved in from the outset and shaping the LLE. We think that the challenge fund that the OfS are launching will help to give providers the ability to offer prospective students genuine choice in how they choose to study through these new and more flexible options. I'd really want to emphasize that the learning that we get from this trial will be really important in terms of how we develop towards the LLE, and we're keen to work with successful providers to ensure that we can evaluate it effectively. We're really keen to, I really want to emphasize, we're really keen in terms of the learnings from this trial, and that's really the sort of key purpose of it. Move to the next slide, please. So through this, we're taking a sort of two-stage approach to the trial. So first of all, we've got the OfS launching this challenge fund. We're looking for the OfS to distribute funding for the development of new short courses at levels 4 to 6. What we are envisaging is providers creating these short courses around 30 we're anticipating currently will be around 30 credits in size, but we'll provide full details and the guidance that goes out in August. And we're looking for providers to create these short courses from degrees, from HTQs, and from other level 4 and 5 qualifications designed to align with occupational standards. So really wanting providers to start to split up their provision into smaller chunks that will provide value in themselves, but then also as a pathway to further study. We see it's incredibly important that the short courses created have had real input and support from employers. We really encourage providers to look at how they can work with employers in terms of the design and then also the delivery of the provision. We want to see a range of subjects in the trial, both technical and non-technical courses in areas such as STEM, education, digital innovation, and healthcare. There's a particular opportunity that we see in terms of creating courses to support the skills needed to meet our net zero ambitions. I think what I would say is that, as I said, we are keen in it being a sort of broad range of subjects in the trial. We're keen in terms of there being a broad range of types of courses from all from the sort of 3 levels of the qualifications. As part of the courses that are developed, it's important that the learners will gain valuable skills from the individual course, and that's critically important, but they should also be able to progress on to further study. So they should be obviously be credit bearing, but then also have the ability that if they wanted to do a full qualification later on, including a degree, a HDQ, then that should be possible for them. Then the second part of the trial, so obviously we see one part of the aim is about stimulating provision and getting new provision, but we're also keen to support access to short courses. So eligible students enrolling on them will be able to access tuition fee loans from the start of academic year 22-23 through a completely new student finance product, which will be especially designed for learners studying these shorter flexible provision in support of the development of the LLE. And we'll be making changes to student finance regulations to enable students to study to gain tuition fee loans. So thanks very much. As I said, we're really pleased to be launching this and working with the OfS as part of the Challenge Fund, and I will pass over now to Sandra.
Hiya, okay, well thanks Pete, and hello, thank you again for joining the webinar today. My name is Sandra Binns and I am the HE Short Courses Trial Manager, so looking after the challenge competition process for the OfS. So today I'll cover some of the basics of the competition process, but as Chris mentioned, there will be full guidance published in late August. So what I'll cover today isn't exhaustive, but it should give you some of the headline information that you'll need to start thinking about the projects. So next slide, please. So the role of the OfS in this, so where DfE sets the policy objectives for the trial, the OfS has the responsibility of delivering and managing the process, assessing the bids and awarding funding for the programme. So we will also work with DfE to develop an approach which allows us to use the project evaluations to help inform further development of the LLE. So we're really the project managers of this programme. So the overarching aim of the trial is, like Pete said, to test the supply and demand for HE short courses, as well as test the student loan system in preparation for the Lifelong Loan Entitlement. So we'll be looking to fund a mix of courses, so both technical and non-technical, from levels 4 to 6, including degrees, degree apprenticeships, and higher technical education qualifications. And we really want to fund a variety of provision so that this will help us test the type of provision in different contexts. So again, because this is a trial, we really want to understand how it works in different levels, different types of courses, and see where the demand and the kind of supply and demand really is, and that can help develop the policy further. And it's important to note as well that the courses developed through the competition will be regulated within the system that we currently have at the OfS, the current regulatory system, but we'll also use the trial to test our regulation within the context of more flexible and modular provision. So next slide, please. So there are a few key dates you want to keep in mind as you're developing your bids. So as I mentioned, we'll publish full guidance, so the full kind of bidding and assessment guidance that you're used to seeing for challenge competitions in late August when the bidding window opens. The bidding window will be open from late August and close in late September. And we'll publish the dates, exact dates in due course, but we will publish those as soon as we can, and we will let you know when that goes up. But it's important to start thinking now about how and if you would be in a position to develop the provision. So the bidding window is quite a lot shorter than we would normally allow, but we just needed to get the competition up now so that courses could be developed for delivery in September 2022. But we're happy to take queries via the short course email that we will put up at the end of this presentation, and we'll continually update our FAQs on the website in order to provide as much information as we can to help you when you're developing the bids. So it's also worth noting that the funds awarded to successful projects must be spent by March 2022, and that's for courses starting in September 2022. So I've provided a list here of eligibility and criteria. This is a non-exhaustive list, but we will provide very much more detailed bidding guidance in the August guidance, which provide a lot more detail about the bidding criteria. But generally, so the competition is open to approved fee cap providers, and they are the ones that are eligible to bid. Other providers can be involved, but the approved fee cap provider must be the lead provider of the bid. The subjects we're looking to fund, subjects such as STEM education, digital innovation, healthcare, and courses delivering skills that meet net zero. And importantly, the bids need to demonstrate clear and evidenced skills need and include evidence of employer support, and that's employer involvement as well as support. So we very much want to see how employers are involved in the development of these courses. So importantly, the projects funded through the trial should, like Pete said, should support individuals to upskill and reskill while enabling progression to full qualifications and meet employer needs. And this will be particularly important to demonstrate in the bids. So, like I said, like the variety of levels, we're looking to fund the variety of courses and subjects that meet skills needs. And this scope will allow providers to use the knowledge of their local economies and develop provision that meets employer needs. So we really want to see how the developed courses meet the needs of the employers that you're targeting and how that contributes to the local and national economy. And the bids must include evidence of that and how, again, how they're actively supporting the provision. So you'll see a lot more detail about the challenge competition information in the August guidance, but again, happy to take questions through either email or in the Q&A session coming up. So next slide, please. So the competition will distribute up to £2 million, and we expect to fund approximately 20 providers. The maximum bid amount will be confirmed again in the August guidance, but there will be an opportunity to bid collectively. And again, we'll kind of set that out in more detail in the August guidance. The funding available is revenue only and will be able to be used for capital expenditure. Payments to the successful projects will start in December 2021. And again, the full funds, all the funds must be spent by March 2022. The bidding process will follow kind of a standard OfS Challenge Competition pipeline. So the OfS will provide bidding application templates that must be used for submission. The bids will be submitted by email. The OfS will carry out the internal assessments, and then the recommendations will be reviewed by an independent panel. And we will announce successful projects in November 2021. So next slide, please. So that is pretty much what we've got in terms of process, but if you haven't already, please read the initial guidance note that we published on 21st of July, and that sets out kind of this initial scope of the projects, and that information will be expanded on in the August guidance. And if you have any questions regarding the bidding process at this point, feel free to contact us at shortcourses@officeforstudents.org.uk. And like it's already been mentioned, a recording of the webinar will be available on the OfS website shortly. And they will be available to be viewed with closed captions. So please share this recording with colleagues that may not be able to be here today, and with your networks that you think might be interested. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to see if we have, well, I'll hand back over to Chris because he's just popped up on the screen. We might be waiting for Hugh Morrison from the SLC.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Thanks, that's really helpful. So I'm afraid that we haven't been able to get Hugh into the session. So we're experiencing some technical barriers to that, and we're not sure he'll be able to join. I think what we'll do is put on our site his slides, and possibly, if we can, get him to record what he was going to say, so we can share that with you as well. Because obviously the student loans aspect of this is an important aspect of it. Colleagues who are about to run the Q&A panel now are familiar with some aspects of that, so we'll try to handle any questions you have about that to the best we can, and we'll also pick it up afterwards. So with that, I think I'm going to hand over to you, Brooke, and you will bring into play Pete and Sandra again, as well as Maggie, Pete's colleague from the DFE, and pick up the wide range of questions that are already coming through during this session.
Exactly. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Pete, coming on board. And I think, Sandra, you can come back onto the screen as well. And Maggie, if you're here, you can come on as well. For everyone that's joined us today, thanks so much for coming along to hear about this new initiative. You have heard now from us from a bit, from OfS, from DFE in a bit, and like Chris just said, unfortunately, the session that we had planned for SLC isn't going to work because of technical difficulties, but we will add that on, and that will be available on our web pages along with a recording of this webinar in its entirety. This Q&A session is then obviously meant to give us some time to answer the questions you've already sent through, so thanks so much for already firing those through, but also any more questions that come. So please do continue to send them through the Q&A rather than the chat. And some of our team is busy looking through them. So I'll have them here, and I'll fire them off to the right person as best I can. We will try to get through as many questions as possible. Crucially, these questions are obviously to give you some clarification, but also to gather up the types of queries from you so that we can inform our FAQs, which are now also published on our web pages and will be regularly updated, but also so that we can take away some of these things and think about them in the policy before finalizing the full guidance at the end of August. I think that's all the reminders I needed to throw out there at the start. So I'm going to just jump right in for a question for Pete, as I'm sure many of these actually are quite high level and they're quite policy oriented. So the division really will be that I'll throw questions to Sandra that have to do with the process we're building around the competition itself. But where there are policy questions, I'll throw them to Pete with, of course, the proviso on his behalf that we are still figuring these things out with him too. And I know he's been working really hard with ministers and other senior colleagues at DFE to try to pin down details about this initiative. So to start things off then, Pete, why has level 7 been excluded from the competition? There's been some success in Scotland with the SFC funding modular provision at postgraduate level. And so why aren't we taking that on board and considering it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid question. I mean, I think the main reason is due to the purpose of the trial working towards the LLE, and this currently stated aims of the LLE being to support level 4 to 6 provision. So that's basically why that's why a lot of the decisions that we've made have been taken, is with the purpose of testing the right things for level for the introduction in the LLE.
Thanks very much, Pete. Does this trial include subjects beyond what we have published in the July guidance, like the creative or performing arts? And I'm going to throw that over to Pete, as well as I know we've been interested to know more about the restrictions the competition might have to observe.
Yeah. So the subjects included, I mean, we've tried to go with a quite a sort of broad range of subjects. So the ones listed in terms of sort of STEM, healthcare, and so on, and digital innovation. I think we're looking to get sort of technical and non-technical. The other aspect that I would want to sort of emphasize is that we are willing to sort of consider courses where there's a sort of clear link to net zero ambitions. And we've deliberately not been prescriptive about exactly what subjects that means. We would be looking to take quite a sort of broad range of subjects. So if you think a subject will help meet net zero ambitions, then you'll have to make clear in your bid how that is the case.
Thanks very much, Pete. Moving swiftly on then, are we interested in bids being collaborative, Sandra?
Yeah, so bids can be collaborative. The proviso being that an approved fee cap provider needs to be the lead provider submitting the bid, but we do welcome collaborative bids between institutions, and we'll make that clear in the guidance about how the kind of breakdown of funds would be expected as well. But yes, definitely we would welcome the collaborative approach.
And while I'm with Sandra, one on delivery method, are there any restrictions on the type of delivery method?
No, there are no restrictions on the type. I mean, we would be looking to kind of fund what you as providers would think are flexible provisions. So that's including kind of, so for example, blended learning or evening and weekend classes and that kind of thing. But part of the trial aims is to uncover what kind of flexible provision is needed, what students will respond to. So the kind of flexibility aspect of that provision, we would like to see how providers respond to that and what they may offer. And but again, it should be kind of informed by how you know that your learners want to learn.
Thanks, Sandra, that's helpful. Pete, I have a question here, which is posed as can we, but I imagine that the asker really wants to know more is, are we looking for alignment between this initiative and other policy areas? For example, substantial work with employers for regional IoT bids that have already gone through, or for the evolving local skills improvement plans. I'm just switching it because obviously, of course, providers can do this, but I think the question would probably be more useful if people could understand if we or DFE is actually looking for some fairly clear cohesion between those types of regional skills-based efforts and these types of initiatives, our short course initiative, which is really about aiming for flexible learning in order to support greater reskilling. So can you talk a little bit about how maybe DFE sees these things joining together or not, and then that might help providers understand?
So I guess there's probably two aspects to that. So I guess in terms of would we be wanting sort of duplication, then definitely not. So I think it's got to be definitely clear how something, if you've got funding through another route, then how whatever you're planning to do would build on it. But I mean, I think it is it would be useful where there's a local skills improvement plan in your area to make clear how the subjects that the courses that you're creating will really build towards that. So I guess it is probably both. It needs to be clear how it sort of is adding to existing funding, but it's definitely we'd be keen to see bids that are really sort of addressing local skills needs and addressing some of the key work that's going on in the local area, if that answers that question. I did notice, just to go back to a previous question, I did notice that someone suggested they hadn't really answered the question regarding creative art subjects. So I mean, I think it's part of the trial. We have been looking to take a broad range, but are looking to have some restrictions on it so that to keep the trial manageable as we learn towards LLE. I think is within creative arts subjects. I mean, I think depending on what there are, there'll be opportunities in terms of sort of digital innovation. There's some links there. I think also within the net zero ambitions, if you can link what your course is to that and make a sort of coherent case, then I think it can be sort of considered within that. But there are restrictions, and we're making restrictions to keep the course list manageable. So hopefully that answers it slightly more clearly.
And you may have already said this, but the intention is to make very clear in the August full guidance the list of courses which are eligible, so that there isn't any question about that. Is that correct, Sandra and Pete? We're still aiming for that?
Yeah, I mean, it won't be a completely prescriptive list of each individual subject area, because we are keen to allow sort of variation particularly within the net zero, and not because I think we do appreciate that there's quite a sort of broad range of subjects that fit within that, and within that there's sort of sub areas within particular subjects that would be more useful for net zero, but we will provide more detail, but it won't be a sort of list of subject codes.
All right. If I can just keep you in the hot seat for one more minute, Pete, while we're on the issue of meeting local skills needs. I know we've discussed this at length. I thought it might be helpful within the context of the webinar for those listening to hear a little bit more about what you see, what the department sees as the types of evidence that providers might be looking to pull together in order to demonstrate that their proposals do actually meet local skills needs. I know we do a lot of this type of thinking at OfS, but obviously we're working in partnership with you on this particular initiative. And I know the minister is really, really keen on seeing that these programs do indeed have employer support and do indeed meet local skills needs. So I wondered if you might share with everyone what in your estimation are the particular types of evidence or particular types of employer support that you would be interested in seeing? Okay,
so I mean, I think showing evidence where an employer sort of has helped create a course or is involved in the delivery is obviously would be helpful. I mean, I think showing quite clear evidence that they support it and that there's particular employers that you've consulted with to look at these courses, and sort of providing evidence that there is employers either in your local area or in a national scale that are telling you and similar providers that these skills are needed. As Brooke was alluding to, it is something that we are really keen in showing, is that the courses that are created have really quite clear employer support. I think there are a number of ways that can be demonstrated, but I think it's definitely got to be clear in in providers' bids how exactly it's meeting local or national skills needs, and how exactly employers are supporting it specifically, or the development or delivery of it.
Thanks, Pete. I'll give you a rest now and come over to Sandra for a few procedural questions. So going back to the delivery method, we've had a few other questions come in. Could delivery be completely 100% online? Could the provision be 100% online?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that being the case. Again, I think it's about the bid making clear how that will be something that is new and how that is developed differently with employers and how that connectivity is articulated, and also kind of how you come up with the how that's evidenced. So is it that you've seen demand for the online learning and how that will support that kind of shorter course aspect of the delivery? But there's no restriction saying that you have to have a certain amount of online learning, or indeed, we really want to see how the flexibility, like what flexibility you can provide. And as long as you can demonstrate that that is an evidence effective way of doing that, then there's no particular way that we're looking for the provision to be delivered.
Sandra, and I'm going to stick with you because we have several questions coming in around funding and how the funding within the program works. So one question that asks, how does, and they've clearly taken some quotes from our guidance, how does spend by March 2022 for a course starting in September 2022 work? And the sub question to that is really, who funds the actual activity between March 2022 and September 2022?
So the funding that's distributed to the successful projects is expected to contribute to the cost of things like curriculum development, internal validation activity, so the developmental part of the process, so not necessarily the marketing and the recruitment side of things. So it's about spending the money to develop the courses rather than the actual delivery itself. So that is where that kind of tight time scale comes from.
Fair enough. The other side of that is I think it's clear that there's some expectation that providers themselves will be putting money into this. And as Sandra said, the money that we are receiving from the department in order to push out to providers must be spent by March 2022. And we just work with that constraint. So we'll give you some booster money to pump prime this activity, and then providers and other partners will need to provide additional funding up until delivery as much as it is needed for the projects. Sandra, there's another few questions around looking for a bit more detail about how the money can be spent. So must it be revenue only? It can't be for capital expenditure. Can you say a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that it needs to be spent for, again, the kind of development of the course. So it's not necessarily about setting up new using it to build anything new. It's more for the activity to develop the course, the curriculum, the engagement with employers and that kind of thing. So very much more the developmental side than the capital side. So working within the constraints of, for example, the technology that you have already to deliver that new types of provision.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. Pete, I'm going to give Sandra a rest now and come back to you here on a few questions. How do you see degree apprenticeships fitting into this initiative, if they do fit in?
I guess there's some areas where they potentially would, but I think the main area where they would be where a degree apprenticeship was also providing modules or courses for an undergraduate degree or a level 4 and 5 qualifications. We generally wouldn't see them fitting in terms of this because they do sit slightly separately from the current sort of funding model.
Is it fair to say that we might need some movement from ESFA in that sense in order to, if there were to be degree apprenticeships fitted into this, because of the fact that they are regulated by the ESFA and the structure of them is set up through the apprenticeship standards? I mean, I wonder if providers really have flexibility to try to change them around because of delivery length. I wonder.
Yeah, I think they are just quite a separate case. I mean, I think what's probably most helpful is if we provide a response to that specific question afterwards, just once we sort of completely have a sort of very clear view, and we can sort of make it absolutely critically clear what types of qualifications come into scope and don't. But our anticipation would be it would be more undergraduate, typical undergraduate degrees, and then level 4 and 5 qualifications that align to occupational standards or are going to be HTQs.
Okay. It would be helpful, I think, if we can take that away jointly and do something on the FAQ, especially because, you know, HTQs could themselves become parts of apprenticeships going forward, and that's the ambition. So
exactly.
the territory here is not clear.
I think that's why my answer sort of slightly sort of caveated, because I think there are different circumstances where the course would be, but as a general rule, we wouldn't be wanting people to split up degree apprenticeships.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Sandra, this is another question about skills evidence, but I'm going to put it to you as the program manager. Will local quantitative data on skills demand from employers be valued in bids, or are we only seeking qualitative evidence?
I think quantitative evidence would be helpful. I think if you can provide as much kind of evidence as possible, obviously within the kind of page, we don't want tables and tables and tables of data, but if you have quantitative evidence, that's really helpful, and that definitely kind of will provide more for the assessors to look at and say, okay, actually, you know, there's a real understanding here. I guess you could kind of make it akin to those of you who are familiar with access and participation plans, how it's very helpful to evidence how something, how you come to the conclusion that you've come to using qualitative and quantitative data, particularly where there are these kind of nebulous ideas about, you know, demand, what does that mean? And if you can provide a statement and then say, this is how we've come to that conclusion, using quantitative evidence would be very helpful with that, in order to allow the assessors to understand where you're coming from.
Thanks, Sandra. Pete, in a previous iteration of lifelong learning funding, people could only claim funding for qualifications of a higher level than the ones they currently held. So they effectively were shut out of retraining. Is that the case now? And how do we see any ELQ rules playing into this?
Okay, so for the purposes of the trial and the student finance product that will be launched from September 2022, students won't be restricted due to ELQ rules. That's a specific thing for the trial. It doesn't necessarily it doesn't prejudge either way what happens in the LLE. But what we were keen in ensuring was that we were able to sort of test different cohorts as part of that. So yeah, so there won't be ELQ restrictions for learners taking out these loans. The key restriction will be that they'll be able to take out a maximum of 4 loans during the period of the trial.
Thank you, Pete. Sandra, does the funding period end before the delivering period starts? I think we already answered that, but there's a second question, which is, if so, could you unpack the kinds of evidence or learning that you'd like to see arising from this funding investment? And I suppose I should just say, since I've kind of dismissed the first part of the question, this is the point that you and we have debated internally at OFS for quite a bit around the fact that we need to evaluate. But the funding period won't extend through the entire evaluation period. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be helpful.
So we will expect, like normal challenge competition bids in previous iterations of these kinds of funding, all the projects will be expected to have an evaluation plan for their own project. So you will need to evaluate how the project went, particularly around outcomes and how you think that how successful the project was. But in terms of the overall evaluation, really what we're still working with DFE on how the longer term evaluation of the program as a whole will work. But what we're really looking for is for the projects to individually contribute to a larger evaluation that will help inform the policy objectives going forward. So once we have that evaluation of the larger kind of program evaluation kind of framework set out, we will communicate that as well. But there will definitely be an expectation that each provider, each project in its individual circumstances will evaluate and have some sort of reporting mechanism so that we're able to draw on that evidence. It's really important for these projects to, because it's a trial, really important for these projects to demonstrate that they will be able to understand if the outcomes they expected are the outcomes that were delivered, and feed in any kind of learning into a wider evaluation. That's just not technically set out how that will happen, but it will happen because this trial needs to feed into the wider policy objectives.
Thanks, Sandra. Back over to you, Pete. Now we've had several questions come in around credits as expected. Could you tell us a little bit more about the size of modules or the numbers of credits that you see? Some people are throwing in questions saying, we've heard that modules have to be 30 credits. Is that what they have to be? Could they be 3 10 credits that sew together for 30? What's the flexibility around that? And what really is the size of module? Thanks.
So I think the key thing to note is that what you're offering has to meet the definition of being a short course. It has to actually have a sort of, it has to have value in its own right. What that will mean is that if there's 3 10 credit modules that can be repackaged, reconstituted into one standalone course, then that, assuming that it sort of meets the other sort of eligibility criteria, then it would be possible to do that. Similarly, if you have a degree and you have if you have a degree, you can repackage that and split it up into 30 credit courses. We will be looking. We'll confirm the exact size as part of the guidance in the Q&A. But our current thinking would be that they'd have to be 30 credits in size. Some of that is due to sort of linking it with some of the sort of thinking through the like LLE and through the sort of Augur review that came out in terms of that. But there is sort of flexibility in terms of repackaging a number of modules into a 30 credit course. But the key thing is that needs to be a 30 credit course, and it needs to be clear how the sort of course works together, and you're creating an actual 30 credit course, and it's not sort of 3 quite separate 10 credit modules that don't really work together, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Pete. I think we heard very clearly that the short course is expected to be 30 credits, which I think is a helpful line in the sand, perhaps, for listeners. About one of the aspects that you mentioned a couple times in your answer, I just want to pick up also for some clarity. Should these short courses be only repackaging of existing courses, or could they be novel new developments?
So, and anything that is created will have to be will have to form part of a level 4, 5, or 6 qualification. I mean, I think there would be situations where someone could create a new short course and then decide, well, actually, that also is a good sort of new short course, and I'd also want to offer that to students. But it is part of the sort of degree qualification. But I think the key thing, it will need to be, it will need to also be part of a designated qualification.
just picking up on that point, what if a provider developed a new designated qualification that was a degree, and that as part of this, let's say they could just do all of this magically in 6 months' time, and what they did was develop a new degree, part of which were new modules. So in essence, it wouldn't be an established existing degree already at their institution. I'm testing the appetite for, you know, newness versus just taking bits of what already exists at providers, because they will want to kind of get a sense of each possibility in this space.
So yeah, I mean, it's a slightly difficult one. I mean, I guess what we don't want people to do is to create completely new degrees where they've just sort of decided, well, as a way to include their short courses, we've created a completely new degree just for the purposes of this competition. I mean, I think given the amount of work that would involve, it's pretty it's very unlikely that someone would want to do that. I think what we are keen for providers to do is to take the qualifications and look at how they adapt it. We're not wanting someone to just go, well, I've got a 30 credit module that I currently provide as part of a degree. I'm just going to put that to people, and that's all I've done. We would expect them to look at how they make it appropriate for as a short course, and how they ensure that short course is really valuable for the person.
Thanks, Pete. Let's go over to Sandra for some more process questions. So can providers submit multiple bids to the competition?
So I don't think so. I think we would be looking for providers to, so as a lead provider, you can submit one bid, but you might be a partner in some of the other bids. So it's this is a kind of way we've done challenge competitions in the past. So one provider will only be able to submit one bid as the lead provider, but they may be a partner or a contributor or a collaborator in a second bid.
Thanks, Sandra. And what's the maximum amount for a bid?
I think so. The maximum amount, yeah, that hasn't been established yet, but that will be in the August guidance published in late August. So we will be able to confirm that in due course.
Lovely, thank you very much. Either or both of you, there's more questions about employers, and I think that's probably an important topic to hit because I know we've given this a lot of thought ourselves already. So can you expand on what employer links need to look like, and whether employers need to be directly involved, or if it's something more like employer endorsements? Do employers also include the voluntary sector? So some questions around what types of employers, also then questions around what type of employer evidence or employer support we're looking at, probably both in terms of the entire program, but also as part of the bids. I don't know which of you, I threw it to both of you unhelpfully, but maybe Sandra, I'll give it to you first from the competition angle, and then maybe Pete would like to say something as well.
Yeah, so in terms of the type of employer involvement, it would be very much employer involvement. We want evidence of employers being actively involved. So it's not just a case of endorsement, we think this is a good idea. It would be them being actively involved, for example, in curriculum development. So it would be more than just them saying that, yes, we do think this is a need and we think this course will meet that need. In terms of evidence, so at a minimum, we would probably want a letter describe it from the employer describing their involvement. But again, we will expand on this further in the August guidance, but we would very much obviously welcome further evidence and evidence within the bid about exactly how that employer is involved and how they're actively involved, what they're contributing, and what their role really is in the development of the course. And Pete, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sandra's probably covered the key things. I think, as she alluded to, I think what we're really looking for is more than just a sort of templated letter that someone's provided, we're looking for a lot of evidence in terms of how the employer is involved, and how, and as part of the evidence, how the course is really supporting employer needs. So yeah, I mean, I think there's various sort of levels of evidence that can be provided, but we want to make sure that it's quite clear and it's sort of as robust evidence.
Thanks, Pete. Sandra, how do we expect, or how can colleges or other providers without degree awarding powers, therefore obviously the inability to just design their own courses, how can they qualify for this opportunity or participate within it?
So there's the opportunity to participate collaboratively. So you could partner up with a different institution in order to be involved in that. So that's probably your best way to go about being involved. And within those arrangements, you know, that it could be, if it's a very close collaborative arrangement, we do want to see obviously development at levels 4 and 5 as well. So we would probably expect to see a lot of colleges being involved in the bids in order to kind of deliver the qualification levels and those different types of provision. And collaboratively is probably your best way to go.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sandra. Pete, can we provide any more clarity on what exactly a short course is or isn't?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's we will provide a sort of an exhaustive answer in the Q&A to make sure that everyone is completely clear on this. But I mean, I think part of it is that a short course needs to. It does need to have actual value, so it needs to be providing the person that's studying it something something valuable in its own right. So a short course can't just be someone deciding to say, okay, well these are modules. I've just taken any old module from a course. There does need to be a degree of sort of selection as part of that to make sure that what you're creating is actually going to have value for the person studying it. We will be providing guidance that's sort of quite clear in terms of the different sorts of evidence and the different parts of the criteria that will need to be met as part of the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Pete. A bit of the longer term question now. So when does the trial end and how long should courses last? Yeah, so
so I think, as I said earlier, so the LLEs plan to be brought in from 2025. We currently anticipate the trial running until that period. I can't completely guarantee that, but that's our current sort of expectation. In terms of how long the courses should last, we'd like courses, courses will need to be able to be completed within a year, matching the sort of current sort of intensity rules in terms of 25%. They can be completed a lot quicker than that. So someone could, if you want, they can be completed a lot quicker than that, but they need to be completed within a year.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Pete. What do we think? And I suppose I'll throw this to Sandra, but again, Pete might want to come back in on this as well. What do we think success looks like at the end of this trial? I think probably Sandra can talk about the trial we're running, but then this feeds into broader work that Pete's dealing with, which is why I think you might have a couple different thoughts on this. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, so in terms of kind of success from our point of view, I think what we really want is the variety of different outcomes. So in terms of the bids that we get and the bids that end up being funded. So in order to kind of provide the learning for the longer term objectives that Pete might speak to, we really want to see bids from courses speaking different levels, so level 4, 5, and 6. Different course types, different subject areas, different employer needs. So I think for us, for the OfS, the kind of success would be having a really broad and diverse range of projects being funded, so that we are able to use that learning really effectively and provide the most kind of evidence we can in terms of helping contribute to the DfE policy objectives. Because that will be, that is the kind of point of this trial, is to test that supply demand and how students respond to that. So, within a relatively small kind of pool of funded projects, and we need to take kind of we can get as much difference as we can, so that we can see how different aspects of the projects work and react, and how students respond to them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the points Sandra's made so far. I mean, I think that we've probably got sort of immediate aims in terms of the sort of benefit to the learners and providers in terms of what we're doing in terms of providing new opportunities for learners to study. But really, the whole purpose of this trial is allowing us to build and test towards the LLE. We're conscious that the LLE is going to be quite a big change, and we need to understand certain things better. So better understanding how employers will view these types of courses. Will learners get value out of an individual course or module when the LLE comes in? Understanding more around what providers will need to do to adapt their courses. And I think another key aspect is around the student loans company delivery. We were keen to create a new product as part of this, so that we could start building towards the LLE and the sort of systems that will be required for that. So I guess the key thing that we'll be looking to do is sort of learn from it and understand better how we will deliver the LLE and help with a sort of smooth transition towards LLE.
Thanks, Pete. I'm conscious of time, and I know we only have a couple more minutes left in the Q&A, but your questions have come in fast and thick. And like I said, we will take time with all of the questions that came in on the back of this and update our FAQs and get responses to all the questions. So please don't worry if we haven't gotten to yours. But Sandra, in a kind of quick fire, fast final round, I've got a few that I think you can speak to. So is it one course per provider, or can providers submit proposals for more than one course, or either?
Yeah, I think you could submit for more than one course, as long as you have the evidence to demonstrate the need for that and how that will be managed. So how you will deliver those two at the same time and what they're targeted towards, and how employers are involved in both of those. So yeah, as long as they meet the kind of requirements of the involvement and other eligibility, I don't see a problem with submitting more than one.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'd encourage providers to think about how whether there's sort of multiple courses, and within a degree, whether there's a case for sort of multiple courses to be created from that, rather than just one course.
Thanks, Pete. Sandra, are bids that involve partner institutions likely to be prioritized?
I don't think so. I think that it's really about demonstrating how the course provides value and how the course supports employer needs. So I think if you have collaborative partners, and you can elaborate on how that strengthens the meeting the kind of criteria of the bid, but they won't necessarily be prioritized, because it may be that a provider has one really strong partner where another provider has maybe 5 but isn't maybe as strong. So there's not kind of a limit in terms of how many collaborations there can be. It's really about the strength of the bid as a whole in terms of what it can deliver and the evidence to support those involvements.
That's great. And maybe a final question over to Sandra about timings of things. So we've said late August, but obviously some attendees today have concerns around August slowdown in providers, and when exactly we'll get public, get the guidance out, and what our timeline for the autumn looks like with as much specificity as possible. Can you perhaps wrap us up with a bit of that?
Yeah, so we're looking at late August. So hopefully kind of in the last, kind of towards the last week in August. That is what we're aiming for. But obviously the date is still to be confirmed. We are aware that it is hitting a bit the summertime period, and that is why we wanted to do this webinar now and get this kind of high level guidance out, so you can really start thinking about if this trial might be for you and what you've got that you can adapt. And obviously we will be available, via the short courses email to answer questions as we go along. We'll try to keep we will keep our FAQs up to date. So we're really trying to give as much information as we can now, so you can start doing that initial thinking, and then when the full guidance comes out, hopefully it will be more tinkering around the edges than just starting from scratch, because we are aware it's a bit of a shorter timeline than you'd normally be used to.
And I suppose I would just underline the fact that we are contactable at this point going forward. If you do have additional questions around that, or around, the types of questions being asked here, please do send them. Sandra, I believe we have an inbox for that now published, don't we, as part of the guidance? And Sandra and her team are absolutely all over that. So we will work to get questions back to you all individually, and also, like I said, to keep the FAQs quite updated. A few final questions then. I see I just have a couple more minutes here. So Pete, do we have an idea of how many students might be involved in this trial? Is there a target or any kind of indication? We've had some kind of speculative questions asking about whether we have a number of students that should or could be enrolling in 22-23 on this.
So I mean, I think quite a lot of this will depend on the types of courses and the demand. So I won't share a sort of specific number at this point.
No, nothing. Go ahead, Sandra.
I was going to say, I think one thing to bear in mind when you're doing the bids as well is that is one of the things we'll want to see as well, is if you can evidence what you think demand looks like. And that's part of the kind of, standard value for money aspect of these types of bids. So it would be, ideal for you to think about, okay, how do you define that demand, and how many student numbers would you project in terms of how the course will respond to demand from students as well as demand from employers.
And maybe one last question around subjects. Sandra, very quickly, how are we defining health? Is it restricted to only medicine and nursing, or can it include a broader range of health and social care programs? Sorry to preempt your answer.
So, yeah, I think similar to the net zero description that Pete said, it's about kind of evidencing how that course will contribute to healthcare, and I think we're open to that broader range of subject areas.
That's great. Thanks, Sandra. And Pete, any help with definitions of digital innovation? There are opportunities within digital media, games design, production, virtual production, animation, just really extended options. Sky's the limit here.
I think it is. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of variety. I think we were keen to sort of provide a non sort of really prescriptive list of subjects to allow providers to adapt to the sort of local and national skills needs that they see, rather than us provide a specific sort of subject code. There was just one other thing. I have seen quite a lot of questions around the sort of credit side, so we will sort of think about that in terms of whether 30 or there's any sort of flexibility with that, because I've seen quite a lot of comments around that.
That's great. That's great, Pete. I think in the end, I'd like to, of course, thank Sandra and Pete for putting themselves in the hot seat here today for the Q&A session, but also really crucially thank everybody who attended today and who sent in these questions, because while we came in knowing that obviously we want to hear what's top on your mind so that we can take that on board with how we build this competition, we also felt it was really important for our DFE colleagues to hear the types of things that you'll find challenging or that you need clarification on, and so they can do exactly what Pete just said. They can take it away and think more about these things. So Sandra, as I said, will work with her team now to work through all of these questions. Apologies to those who we couldn't get to today. We will absolutely answer them in the form of our FAQs or other ways. So please do keep checking back on our web pages. And thank you all again for your time and enthusiasm in coming to hear about this new initiative. And with that, I'll hand over to Chris.
Okay, thanks, Brooke, and thanks to Pete and Sandra for answering the questions so thoroughly. And above all, thanks to all of you for joining. The questions really will help us to shape and finalise the guidance. And as a number of people have said, if we haven't been able to answer the question in the level of detail or clarity we hope for, we'll put that into the FAQs along the guidance, alongside the guidance as well. So we will be posting a recording, we will be posting slides, we will post what would have been delivered today by Hugh and colleagues from the SLC, so you can see that, because of course the loan component, the student loans company component, is a really important part of this trial. As has been said already, there is an email address for queries, shortcourse@officeforstudents.org.uk. We will be publishing the full guidance in August, so look out for that. Beyond that, look forward to seeing your bids. Have a good day.